Richard Dreyfuss spent half a century carrying a secret about one of the darkest moments in his public life. For years, people thought they knew the truth behind his infamous meltdown, but he kept the real reason locked away. That silence broke in May 2024. When he walked onto a stage in Massachusetts and delivered a speech so explosive that families fled the theater in shock. Many assumed the outburst was political, but at 77 years old, Dreyfuss finally admitted the truth. It wasn't politics that fueled his rage that night. It was something far more personal. The unraveling began 3 days earlier with a single phone call from someone tied to his past. What he was told shook him to the core, reopening old wounds of betrayal that had haunted him for decades. To understand why that night mattered so much, you have to look back at his beginnings. Richard Stephen Dreyfuss was born on October 29, 1947, but his story didn't start there. It stretched back through generations of family history shaped by both violence and survival. His father, Norman Dreyfuss, had grown up in a rough part of Brooklyn where gang violence was an everyday reality. In that world, toughness was not a choice. It was the only way to survive. Though Norman eventually reinvented himself, becoming a respectable attorney and running a restaurant, the shadows of Brooklyn never truly left him. The Dreyfuss family line carried more than just grit. Richard would later discover that his great-grandmother was Hesha Hoffman, a revolutionary who took part in the 1881 assassination of Tsar Alexander II of Russia. She was the only conspirator who managed to escape execution. From Russian assassins to New York street fighters, violence wasn't just something Dreyfuss would one day portray on screen. It was part of his very bloodline. But his mother, Geraldine, was the opposite. While Norman's life had been shaped by conflict, Geraldine was a peace activist who dedicated herself to fighting against the kind of chaos her husband had grown up with. Even Norman's own life carried scars. During World War II, he was caught in a mortar blast at the Battle of the Bulge. The explosion left him permanently injured. He spent the rest of his life walking with crutches and wearing Army-issued orthopedic shoes. This mix of inherited violence and progressive ideals shaped young Richard in ways that later came through in his acting. The characters he played, ordinary men cracking under pressure, emotionally unraveling, were not just performances. They were reflections of a boy raised in a household forever, balanced between pain and hope. By the age of 9, Richard had already decided his destiny. While most children his age were climbing trees or riding bikes in the mid-1950s, he was absolutely certain that he would become an actor. Not wanted to be, but would be. Around that same time, his father's resentment of New York pushed the family to uproot their lives. The Dreyfusses left Queens, spent time drifting across Europe, and finally settled in Los Angeles. For Richard, this constant moving wasn't easy, but he clung to his dream of acting. By the time he landed at Beverly Hills High School, he was already chasing performance opportunities, appearing on stage at Temple Emmanuel's Arts Center and later at the West Side Jewish Community Center under the guidance of drama teacher Bill Miller. While other kids his age enjoyed stability, Richard had constant upheaval, but his passion for acting only grew stronger when he turned 18. The Vietnam War was tearing America apart. Draft notices were being sent across the country, pulling young men into combat. Richard, however, made a bold and unconventional decision. He declared himself a conscientious objector. Instead of going to war, he spent 2 years between 1965 and 1967 working in a Los Angeles hospital, quietly serving others while pursuing his acting career at night. It was a third path, neither the battlefield nor the protest lines, but a kind of service that reflected his inner conflict between chaos and compassion. During those years, he picked up small acting jobs, appearing in television shows like Peyton Place, Gidget, Room 222, and Bewitched. He briefly enrolled at San Fernando Valley State College, but between hospital shifts and acting gigs, school quickly fell away. His life became a delicate balancing act of day jobs and theater rehearsals. Quietly building the foundation for the career ahead, Dreyfuss's first real acting appearance came in 1964 when he was just 15, performing in Mama's House. But even before that, he had landed his very first paid television role in Peyton Place. While other teenagers worried about grades, Richard was already working in Hollywood. At home, however, things were far from supportive. His father, scarred by both war trauma and personal disappointments, had little faith in his son's career path. The tension eventually snapped. When Richard was 21, Norman walked out on the family. Father and son never reconciled, and by the time Norman passed away, they were no longer speaking. For all the success Richard would eventually achieve, he carried the weight of that silence for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Dreyfuss was shaping an entirely new kind of acting style. While many of his peers focused on memorizing scripts and following strict directions, Richard immersed himself in improvisation at the Jewish Community Center. These weren't just classes, they were experimental workshops that taught him to live in the moment, to react authentically in a scene without relying on a script. He believed acting couldn't truly be taught in a classroom. It had to be lived and experienced. That raw, natural approach became the hallmark of his performances. In 1967, he earned a tiny role in The Graduate. His line, "Shall I get the cops? I'll get the cops," was barely registered at the time. But the film itself went on to gross $104.9 million, which would be nearly $857 million today. Millions of people saw it, though few noticed the young actor in the background. Still, that moment marked the beginning of a career that would soon skyrocket. A year later, in 1968, he landed his first leading role in The Young Runaways. Unfortunately, it was a disaster. At only 20 years old, he was cast as a 32-year-old hippie draft dodger, speaking dialogue so out of touch it sounded laughable. Critics shredded the movie, pointing out that it was written by a 51-year-old man who clearly didn't understand 1960s youth culture. While the film later gained a small cult following for being so bad, for Dreyfuss it was a painful reminder. Not every leading role is worth taking, but persistence paid off. In 1973, he transformed himself into the infamous babyface Nelson in Dillinger. Short, twitchy, and violent, the real Nelson had killed more FBI agents than anyone else in history. Dreyfuss studied FBI files and leaned into the role with chilling accuracy, portraying Nelson as a man who killed for the thrill of it. With a budget of only $1.5 million, Dreyfuss made $25,000. But his performance caught the attention of one very important person, Spielberg. That role set him on a path toward one of the most defining films of all time. The following year, in 1974, he starred in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, a powerful story about a Jewish boy in Montreal desperate to escape poverty. The role hit close to home, echoing Dreyfuss's own family roots from Austria and Hungary. The novel had been considered too ethnic for years, but when it was finally adapted, Dreyfuss delivered a performance so authentic that critic Pauline Kael praised him heavily. He was paid $50,000 for the film. But what mattered more was the credibility it gave him as a serious, dramatic actor. At the same time, George Lucas noticed him in a pilot episode of Happy Days that never aired and cast him in American Graffiti. With a tiny $777,000 budget and a 28-day shoot, the film went on to make $140 million worldwide. As Kurt Henderson, the thoughtful teen deciding whether to leave for college, Dreyfuss connected with audiences everywhere. Suddenly, Hollywood knew his name. But everything truly changed in 1975 with Jaws. As marine biologist Matt Hooper, Dreyfuss found himself in one of the most difficult shoots in Hollywood history. The mechanical shark constantly broke down, forcing Spielberg to improvise, which ironically made the film scarier. The shoot dragged from May to October 1974 on Martha's Vineyard, testing everyone's patience. But the results were legendary. Though Dreyfuss later dismissed Jaws as boring, the movie exploded, becoming the highest-grossing film of all time until Star Wars arrived 2 years later. Adjusted for inflation, Jaws earned about $1.5 billion and forever changed how summer movies were made. Dreyfuss was no longer just a working actor. He was a global star by 1977. He reunited with Spielberg for Close Encounters of the Third Kind as Roy Neary. An ordinary man obsessed after witnessing a UFO, Dreyfuss captured the delicate balance of wonder and madness. The film cost nearly $20 million and and earned over $300 million worldwide, making him an even bigger name. That same year, he shocked audiences again, but this time with tenderness. In Neil Simon's The Goodbye Girl, he played Elliot Garfield, a struggling actor sharing an apartment with a single mother and her daughter. His charming, yet vulnerable performance won over audiences and critics alike. In 1978, at just 30 years old, Richard Dreyfuss became the youngest man ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actor. The film grossed over $100 million, proving he could dominate not just thrillers and dramas, but also romance and comedy. Still riding the wave of success, Dreyfuss pivoted in 1978 to something more personal. In The Big Fix, he played private investigator Moses Wine, navigating the lingering shadows of 1960s radical politics. The film wasn't a blockbuster, but it reflected his own political interests and showed he was unafraid to take risks for the sake of meaning. Just 2 years later, in 1980, he would find himself once again in uncharted territory. Pushing his career into new challenges, Richard Dreyfuss once played the role of a piano prodigy. But there was a twist that most people didn't know. At the time he was cast, he couldn't play a single note on the piano. To pull it off, he trained relentlessly for hours a day for 2 straight months. The producers insisted on absolute authenticity, even hiring piano coaches to make sure that every movement of his hands, every press of the keys looked genuine. The atmosphere was so intense that one day on set, when an actress casually set her wine glass on top of a grand piano, the coach cried out in horror. That moment showed just how seriously the production treated its depiction of the high-pressure world of classical music. For Dreyfuss, it wasn't just about pretending to play it was about living inside the character. In 1981, took on an even more emotionally demanding role in Whose Life Is It Anyway? He portrayed a sculptor who became paralyzed after a car accident, forcing the story to tackle one of the most controversial subjects of its time, euthanasia. The character refused to live hooked up to machines, raising haunting questions about whether patients had the right to choose death over life. Critics praised Dreyfuss for striking a delicate balance, finding moments of humor without softening the pain at the heart of the story. The film forced audiences to confront unsettling questions. Who has the ultimate authority over life's end? The doctors, or the patients themselves? After a quiet period, Dreyfuss roared back into the spotlight in 1986 with Down and Out in Beverly Hills, co-starring Bette Midler and Nick Nolte, released under Disney's Touchstone label. It marked the studio's very first R-rated movie. The comedy was outrageous, largely improvised, and an immediate hit with audiences. Opening at number 1, it went on to gross over $60 million against a $14 million budget. For Dreyfuss, it was not just a commercial success, but also a personal comeback, especially since he had been struggling publicly with drug addiction. The following year, he starred in Tin Men 1987, playing B.B. Bobosky, an aluminum siding salesman in the 1960s. His character becomes entangled in a bitter feud with another salesman, played by Danny DeVito, after a minor car accident. What began as a petty rivalry quickly escalated into an all-out war, complete with seduction of each other's wives. While hilarious and biting, the story carried deeper meaning to broken men, desperate to prove themselves in small battles because they were failing at life's larger ones. By the end, both men lost their licenses and their careers. Yet the film suggested they may have gained something more profound, a glimpse of who they really were in 1989. Dreyfuss reunited with Steven Spielberg for Always, a remake of the 1943 film. He played a firefighting pilot who dies and returns as a guardian spirit, with Audrey Hepburn appearing in her final screen role. Spielberg had dreamed of making this movie for years, and the timing was poignant. His own divorce had just been announced that same year. Themes of love, loss, and letting go hung over the film, and Dreyfuss's performance carried that weight. Yet beneath the surface, old tensions between Spielberg and Dreyfuss resurfaced, and their once smooth collaboration showed cracks. His personal life was equally dramatic. In 1983, he met writer and producer Jeremy Rain at a party, and within just 10 days, they married. That same year, their daughter Emily was born. followed by their son Benjamin in 1986. But joy quickly turned to heartbreak. Doctors diagnosed Benjamin with Peter's anomaly, a rare eye disorder, and he later lost vision in one eye. Dreyfuss described the diagnosis as the most emotional moment of his life, a wound deeper than anything fame could soothe. Their third child, Harry, was born in 1990, but the marriage eventually unraveled. By 1995, Jeremy had left with the children, marking another painful turning point in his life. Drama also followed him professionally. On the set of What About Bob? In 1991, Dreyfuss clashed bitterly with co-star Bill Murray, resulting in one of Hollywood's ugliest feuds. Murray allegedly screamed in Dreyfuss's face, telling him that everyone hated him. He even hurled a heavy ashtray at him, barely missing. Murray also pushed their producer into a lake and broke her sunglasses. Dreyfuss later called him a drunken bully and a pig, refusing to even mention the film for years. Decades later, in 2020, he admitted he might one day write Murray a note and let it go, but only maybe. In 2001, he returned to television in The Education of Max Bickford. Portraying a recovering alcoholic professor, the role paid him $100,000 per episode, but the show struggled to survive. Despite breaking ground as one of the first series filmed entirely in high definition and bravely addressing issues like transgender identity and campus politics, ratings were poor. CBS quickly fired 2 producers, and the show was canceled after just 1 season, in 2008. Dreyfuss transformed into Dick Cheney for Oliver Stone's political drama W. Originally, Stone had wanted Robert Duvall. But after Duvall declined, Dreyfuss stepped in. Behind the scenes, though, the set was chaotic. He clashed constantly with Stone, later accusing the director of being a fascist and even comparing working for him to working for Sean Hannity. Dreyfuss shocked audiences by openly defending Cheney in interviews, blaming the American people instead for not resisting Bush-era policies. The movie underperformed, grossing just under $30 million on a $25 million budget, even in his 60s. He surprised fans by jumping into action films. In 2010, at age 63, he joined Red alongside Bruce Willis and Helen Mirren, playing arms dealer Alexander Dunning. Refusing to let age define him, he trained for 3 months, did his own stunts, and even sustained minor injuries yet never used a stunt double. The gamble paid off. The film grossed $199 million worldwide and earned a Golden Globe nomination. His role, originally intended for a much younger actor, proved that older performers could still dominate the screen. In 2016, he once again reinvented himself, this time as Bernie Madoff in the ABC miniseries Madoff. To prepare, Dreyfuss immersed himself in court records, victim testimonies, and interviews, studying for 6 months. He lost 15 pounds, dyed his hair silver, and completely transformed. The role brought threats from real Madoff victims who resented the dramatization. Yet critics praised Dreyfuss's performance for humanizing a villain without excusing him. By 2019, at 72, he took on a quieter role in Astronaut. Playing an elderly man clinging to the dream of space travel, the character mirrored Dreyfuss's own struggles with aging and mental health. He revealed publicly that he had battled bipolar disorder for years. Filmed in harsh Canadian winters over just 24 days, the movie didn't make headlines, but it offered a tender, almost poetic chapter in his career. Dreyfuss's personal battles stretched back to the height of his fame. In 1982, at the peak of his success from Jaws and Close Encounters, he nearly lost everything. One night, he passed out behind the wheel of his Mercedes-Benz 450 SL and crashed into a palm tree in Benedict Canyon. He awoke hanging upside down, strapped in by a seatbelt he didn't remember fastening. Police found cocaine and Percodon in the wreckage, and he was arrested. But the demons weren't just physical. For years, he had visions of a mysterious little girl in a pink dress and horn-rimmed glasses who seemed to haunt him, even appearing at wild parties. On November 19, 1982, he quit drugs cold. Exactly 1 year later, his daughter was born wearing horn-rimmed glasses. To this day, he says he doesn't know if the vision was a warning or a haunting reminder of a fate. He narrowly escaped, but not all his battles came from within. In 2012, Dreyfuss sued his father and uncle, claiming betrayal over a real estate deal. Decades earlier, he had handed them $870,000 for what he was told was a family emergency. Instead, they secretly used it to buy a 13-story building in downtown Los Angeles. Despite funding nearly a third of the purchase, he was told he owned just 10%. Even when the building was sold in 2009 for a $5.5 million profit, he received nothing. It was the second time he had taken them to court, highlighting that even with fame and wealth, betrayal could cut deepest when it came from family. Controversy seemed to follow him everywhere. In 2017, amid the growing #MeToo movement, writer Jessica Tyke accused him of harassment in the 1980s, claiming he once exposed himself in his trailer. Dreyfuss denied that accusation, but admitted to behavior he thought was consensual, calling it a misunderstanding. The timing was especially complicated. Just days earlier, he had publicly supported his son Harry, who accused Kevin Spacey of groping him at 18. Critics quickly pointed out the double standard by 2023. He stirred yet another firestorm on PBS when he blasted the Academy's new diversity rules, saying being told how to cast films made him want to vomit. He even defended blackface performances from Hollywood's past and argued that actors shouldn't have to conform to society's sensitivities. Months later, he went further, claiming it was crazy that he would never be allowed to play a black man. Each interview dug him deeper into controversy.